Hello again, everyone. Welcome back. I would like to talk to you today about chanting for a few minutes if I can. Chanting or recitation or singing is something, of course, we all are aware of. Very, very common, universal to all spiritual expressions in this beautiful world of ours. And at some point in our meditation practice, it is advised that we introduce a chanting component. I'm not just addressing those of you who may self-define as Buddhist or Christian or Muslim or have some sort of faith affiliation. I'm also addressing those of you who consider yourselves kind of secular mindfulness or meditation practitioners who don't necessarily want the religious trappings or the religious overlay. I understand that. Chanting does not necessitate, and the practice of chanting does not necessitate, necessarily anyway, an affiliation with the faith. What it is actually is a mindfulness practice, a meditation practice, a contemplative practice that is designed to move some of the ideas, the teachings, actually, the helpful ideas that underpin our meditation and our mindfulness practice more deeply in our minds, more deeply in our consciousness, more deeply in our hearts, if you wish. And so preceding or following a period of meditation with a short recitation or chant is pretty common in both secular and sacred settings, especially so in sacred settings, as you'd probably expect. And I appreciate that this isn't for everybody. I don't think it's a deal breaker, but I also encourage, I strongly encourage everybody with a meditation practice, regardless of faith affiliation or secular affiliation, to experiment with what it's like to add a short period of chanting, either before or after you're sitting. There is something else that happens with our practice when that is introduced. There is a different door that is opened in our consciousness. There is a different depth to which, again, the teachings that underscore our practice are allowed to go in us. It's quite powerful for a lot of folks, not everybody. Everybody's different, right? So I just want to talk for a few minutes about chanting, what that is, and give you some ideas of how you might play with this idea and experiment on it for your own benefit, right? So chanting, as you are probably not surprised to hear, has its origins going all the way back, when most things that we really wanted to remember and carry on were not written down. They were just passed down orally, right? And so to chant something or to recite it was a way of remembering it, right? You just say it a lot, and people figured out, just like you did at some point, if I just recite something, and I do that a lot, I'm more likely to remember it. Additionally, and very curiously, if I sing it, I'm much more likely to remember it. And there's lots of layers to that. If something rhymes, it's associated with other things in the mind. If it's married to a pitch rise and fall that we call a melody, I'm more likely to retain it because it's married to other things in the mind. There's all sorts of layers to how this was done and why this was done, which explains why we have singing, why we have chanting, why we have recitation, and why all those things are very closely related, but also kind of different. So what I'm encouraging is that you play a little bit, experiment with kind of what moves you the most deeply, what seems to be the most effective for you, because I'm not giving you any hard and fast rules. There aren't hard and fast rules, just some ideas. So lots of us, not everybody, but lots of us went to church as kids, either frequently or infrequently. And so we were exposed to the idea of having responses that were recited, and there were things that were chanted, even if we didn't know that it was a chant, even if it wasn't called that, and things that were sung, again, depending on who we were, where in the world we were raised, and what we were exposed to. But the word I'm using today most often is chanting. That is a kind of singing, strictly speaking. To recite something is much more like the normal speaking voice. that we use, right? So what you're hearing me do now is just use my regular, this is my regular speaking voice. And a recitation voice is awfully like this, right? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. It's very close to the speaking voice. Chanting is a little closer to singing, in that chanting has a little bit more of that, well, what is that magic that we do with our voice when suddenly we're doing this instead of this? There isn't a pitch rise and fall, there is no melody here, and yet you can tell that I am doing something different with my voice that we call chanting, right? That's interesting. There is something different that happens to the voice, right? So chanting is much closer to singing than it is to recitation. If you would like to recite something before or after you're sitting, a teaching, a prayer, a poem, something that has meaning for you, something that reminds you of who you most want to be, something that reflects your aspiration, do it. Recitation is gorgeous. Recitation is really powerful. It's very important. Chanting, again, very, very close, is just another way of working with your voice, right? It tends to wake up both hemispheres of the brain. It tends to have a different quality and a different emotional quality to it for most of us. And of course, if you prefer singing, to actually have a full-on melody and rhythm and the whole thing, you get to do that too. But so to chant something is, again, more like using my voice like this. So the first couple stanzas of the Loving Kindness Sutra, or the Metta Sutra, go, this is what should be done by those who are skilled in goodness and who know the path of peace. You sort of feel what I'm doing with my voice there. I would call that chanting. I'm chanting the first line of the Metta Sutra. This is what should be done. I could also just recite it. This is what should be done by those who are skilled in goodness and who know the path of peace. Beautiful. Either way is lovely. Again, I prefer chanting because it brings to me an emotional quality to it that I personally find reciting doesn't have quite so much, right? The Metta Sutra that I just recited the first line from, the first couple lines there, or loving kindness scripture, Metta Sutra means loving kindness scripture in the Buddhist tradition, is the one that I most often recommend if someone says, hey, I want to try chanting. What do you recommend starting with? I say, oh, start with the loving kindness scripture. Start with the Metta Sutra. It's like one page. It takes maybe 2-3 minutes at the absolute most to recite it. And even if you're not a Buddhist, it doesn't matter what you are, the words of the loving kindness scripture are so universally understood. There's no fancy language. There's not a doctrine. There's not a dogmatic overlay. There's not Buddhist terminology in it, really. It's just expressing the universal human desire that all living beings be free of suffering. Right? So it's really easy to get on board with the spirit and the message of the loving kindness scripture. And chanting the Metta Sutra every day after meditation, or before meditation, if you wish, is a brilliant way of starting to marry, again, to pair what exactly is really informing our meditation practice. Even if we imagine that we are secular practitioners, right? I am practicing mindfulness. I'm here for self-improvement. This helps me lower my heart rate, improve my posture, lower my blood pressure, focus, right? Yes, it does all those things, absolutely. If I end my sitting every day, my 30 minutes of meditation, or however long it is that you're doing your sitting for, by spending 2 more minutes reciting, I hope that what I did today is of benefit to all beings everywhere, I'm introducing an entirely different dimension of practice into my life. Again, even if I never pair that with some organized religion or its traditions or its culture or any of that, if I just crack open in my own human heart the possibility, hey, what I'm doing here in my meditation chair, on my meditation cushion for this time every day has another dimension to it, whether I'm aware of it or not, that ripples out and affects everybody everywhere, right? All of a sudden, a secular practice has become a spiritual practice. Whether it ever goes into religion or not is irrelevant. But all of a sudden, another part of you is open. Whoa, what I just did has an impact on the world just the way the world has an impact on me. Wow. So I'd recommend, as you're experimenting, right, with the idea of chanting, add a chant, that you pick something that has that quality to it for you, something that cracks open the scope of what you're doing, something that makes what you're doing every day on the cushion a little larger, right? Pick a poem that reminds you of this, or a prayer from childhood that had a lot of meaning, a passage from a letter that your grandma wrote you, reminding you how special you are. Something like the Loving Kindness Sutra, something like the 5 Remembrances from the Buddhist tradition. In most Zen temples, of course, the Heart Sutra is one of the things we chant every day without fail. The refuges, the vows. There's a million different things that are chant-worthy from all the traditions of the world, as well as from the best and loftiest of our shared literary tradition. Again, I think of poetry that's outside of religion, right? But stuff like Rumi that belongs to us all, stuff like Maya Angelou, you can chant that, you can recite it every day, get it in your bones. So not only does it crack open another dimension to your practice, folks, but and I'll end with this. What I've discovered, one of the things I've discovered after years of chanting is there is something for me transformative about having powerful words, loving words that represent truth, that represent the beauty of the aspiration of the human soul. There's something really powerful about hearing those coming out of my body, formed with my breath, in my voice. I can't kind of continue to pretend for too long that they belong to somebody else, that they belong to another culture or another time. I can't pretend that it's not mine anymore. That's part of how I experience this. I don't know if that will be your experience, but when you really get something in your bones because you've recited it that many times, it's you. Now it's like part of you. So to hear something really, really beautiful, again, deeply aspirational, deeply true, coming out of your own body with your own voice, formed with air that's been warmed by your own lungs, there is something powerful about that. You can't pretend that it's not you anymore. You can't pretend that it doesn't matter, right? You own it now because it's such an intimate part of you. So it becomes a really important part of our practice, to be reminded of the universal dimension of what we're doing on our cushions every day, the aspirational potential, the interpersonal dimension, if we wish to call it that. Something really powerful about that. So if you're new to chanting practice, I'd say pick something easy, pick something kind of short, pick something like the Metta Sutra. Just Google a translation, print it out, keep it on a piece of paper next to your cushion there. And before you're sitting every day or after you're sitting every day, just pick it up and let it fall out of your mouth for a couple minutes. Stick with it for a couple weeks to give yourself a real sense of what's working in you. They give you a couple weeks worth of experience to really feel, hey, this is the thing I appreciate. This is the part of me that's resisting it. And I now have a chance to bring that into my awareness. Explore that, right? We learn just as much through our resistance to things as we do to our enjoyment and acceptance of things, right? So even if you end up learning, yeah, this is really not my cup of tea, there's a very profound invitation in your practice. The invitation of your practice is to learn, I wonder what that was. I wonder why that didn't resonate. It's not a failure, but I'd be very curious to know what parts of me constricted and resisted when I did that, because there's suffering there that I get a chance to explore, right, and befriend. So chanting, that's my invitation to you. Give it a whirl. Spend some time doing that, see what happens. As always, I appreciate your comments and your questions. I'm found easily on the Flying Cloud zen.org website. If you've got any of those or sharings or anything, please reach out. I'd be happy to get a chance to interact with you. All right. Thank you for your attention. Happy practice. More to come. Okay. Bye-bye.